we're going to kind of talk through the evolution of sales, how we can get bang up to date, but as the title of the webinar says, how we can keep that human touch. So I'm going to go back in time, so to speak. I'm going to kind of skip through the decades. I'm going to talk about what was going on in the world of sales at the time, what's still relevant, because we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but what little shifts we need to make to be sure that that approach is still current, is going to work for us today. So in the 50s, if you think about what was going on then, it was all about effectiveness. It was a rebuilding era. So a lot of stuff in sales was all about process, it's about having systems, it's about having methodology. But absolutely the same today. We train process, we get people to work around frameworks. Actually, I use a 50s framework for a meeting because it's still effective. Attention, interest, desire, action, that stuff works. Why bother changing it? Now, there's some stuff which people need to use today. We can use a structure, we can use a framework that wasn't going on back then. If you think about, storytelling, yes, it was, but not necessarily so well modeled. Social media posts, certainly that wasn't going on back in the 50s. Video messages and the way in which you would structure those are things, again, we can put a formula to them, to the ways in which they will work for people. Similar in the 60s, look, let's go back to there. That really was a time where a lot of psychology came into the world of sales, understanding how people think, understanding their preferences, and just thinking, well, how can we adapt our approach to do stuff that's more comfortable for them? Well, absolutely, 100%, do that today, do it. But we've got some clever ways in which we can do it faster, more effectively. Understanding neuroscience, so the way that we can use fMRI scans and understanding how the brain actually works and responds to stuff, we can take that information, we can use it, adapting how we do things. Even if we're understanding people's personality styles, you can understand that before you've met somebody. I know that sounds weird, but using something like Crystal Knows or Humantic AI, you can get their personality style by plugging into the LinkedIn profile, and it will give you the kind of the disc analysis of where they are. It's very clever stuff, and it means we can be even better prepared than we've ever been before. We think back to this 70s. 70s, a lot of the sales training was about features, advantages, benefits, so fab selling. A good, solid basis to sell. Absolutely, we would talk about that today. People need to understand it. But I would, again, say, look, where we've got a kind of a new take on this is that we need to be a little bit careful just going on and on and on about product. And I see people doing huge amounts of product training, and I think, careful, because if you're filling people's minds with product training, that's what they're going to use when they sell. So it's not that we don't need it, but what will be more useful to train at the same time are the insights which go with the stuff that you're training, the stuff that you're talking about, or you've built into the product to stimulate better conversations. That's what we need to be sharing with people. So the insights are probably more important than some of the features. People can get stuck in feature mode, or even benefit mode. We need to think about how we can help people think. If you haven't noticed, that's about a third time I've said that, helping people think. Let's go back to the 80s. Cracking music in the 80s. Love a bit of 80s music. If you're an 80s music fan, just pop into chat. Who's your favorite 80s music artist? If you're not, just put N. No, pop it Fred. But look, with the 80s, we've got to be very careful. We've got to be careful that some of the rubbish that was taught then isn't leaking into the way we operate today. Like I say, this sort of close, greed is good type stuff. That doesn't work. The same from that decade that we do need to think about is that it's about a series of advancements. Now, we're trying to move the sale forward. So we're getting commitment, or we're closing a certain step. That's fine. But using some of those techniques from back then was terrible. Upgrade it, let's make it new by, again, looking at neuroscience of decision making, thinking about our language patterns so we can use conversational intelligence to kind of understand what we're saying and the impacts it's having. Using mutual action plans, some of the tech we can use to share that stuff online, that live kind of, look, this is where we are in the whole process. Really smart way of working. Moving on, the 90s then, the 90s saved us from the scourge of the 80s. That's what I think when it comes to selling, because it was a sea change in sales. C for consultative. So that's where consultative selling, so based on the research of Neil Rackham, look at all those meetings that he did and understanding that good salespeople weren't just pushing for a close, they're actually asking better questions. Questions which were understanding where someone is now, where they need to be, what the impacts and the implications, the consequences would be to help them understand that there is a difference between those positions. That's a good solid basis. Good solid basis. I'm not going to argue with that. Now, if you connect with me on LinkedIn, you might see me sometimes say consultative selling isn't enough. I don't think it is. I think it's great. I think it's solid, good basis, as I've said. But there are upgrades. Challenger sale is an upgrade of consultative selling, I think. That might annoy the guys there, but it's just a way of asking questions in a certain way, bringing in more insight, more perspective, helping people think more. So we need to think about, how can we use some of these techniques, but bring them up a level? Because they're 30 odd years old. Solid, but other things we can add. Even in the noughties, other stuff was being added into the world of sales. People were working consultatively, but we also start to get a way better understanding of what value is. Value-based selling. We have to call it a name. So again, it's understanding, what is the customer's view of value? What's their definition of it? That's a big mistake when people are selling value. They often decide what it is and go and tell the customer. Like, no, the customer, they're the people who define it. What we can do again to really bring it up to date, all these tweaks you can hear me talk about making, it's the insights we bring. That's what customers want. That's why we hear about customers are shunning salespeople. Salespeople find it harder and harder to speak to people because they're not getting any value. They're not getting relevant stuff. They're not getting value because they're not being helped to think about value. So if we can guide them through the thinking, we can work with them to help them make sense of stuff. A salesperson is a sense maker. For me, that makes a lot of sense. Then we're in a better position. We look in the tens. So what was going on in the tens? I was training sales noughties and tens. At the time I was talking about the sales stature that you had. I couldn't think of a different way of describing, kind of giving that kind of profile or that impression, building that reputation of being the go-to person that someone would want to deal with. Now we'd probably talk about personal branding. We do talk about personal branding. So it's thinking, well, what tools have we got? What ways can I do things to, again, give that right impression that somebody will want to work with me? Again, we can do that. In my opinion, I think the mistake is sometimes to be too corporate, a bit too safe, talk too much about product, lead with problems and put a bit of yourself into it. That's what I'd say. Without going to a full-on personal branding exercise, would be some of the things that we can do just to get ourselves as relevant and as modern as we can. Brings us up to the 20s. I've already kind of alluded to what this is. It's thinking like a partner. It's being more collaborative. It's taking all that good stuff that's gone on before. It's taking that PQ, that thinking like a partner mindset, and bringing the stuff together. That's where we can really start to make sure what we're doing is future-proofed and going to be more effective.